Mhm. Welcome to the History of LA Ska one-on-one sessions. I'm your host, Junor Francis, along our producer and my good friend, Eric Kohler. We've been doing this for a while now, so many thanks to Eric Kohler. This is his brilliant brainchild. This series celebrates the ska, rocksteady, and vintage reggae scene in Southern California and beyond through insightful conversations with legends and modern-day talent, including those behind the scenes. So all the people behind the scene, we really and truly want to thank them. So whether you listen this podcast series or you watch us on YouTube, a big thank you, and of course to your friends and your family. It is your obligation to pass the word along. We really appreciate all the love. Please remember to subscribe and tell a friend. I just said that. Tell a friend, tell as many friends as you possibly can. Friends, plural. Our guest is a singer, songwriter, musician, composer, and our good friend who does everything magnificently well. The one and only Chris Murray.
Yes.
Canadian born and raised in Los Angeles, the entertainment capital of the world. Chris, big respect.
Yes. Hello, Chris.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And we need
I'm a big fan of one-on-one series.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And Junior, thank you for that intro. We need to add promoter Chris Murray as well. We're going to talk about you as a promoter.
Okay.
And Chris, you took part in our second History of LA Ska panel discussion at the Grand Museum back in late 2019. But obviously, as you know, we've been wanting to have you here on this podcast series, one-on-one or two-on-one, to be specific. We're looking forward to talking with you about your career and what you have coming up. We do want to talk about a friend of ours and musical icon, if you will, who unexpectedly passed just over 2 weeks ago. This is our first podcast recording since we lost Greg Lee. So we want to send our condolences, obviously, to Greg's family, to his bandmates and Hepcat and friends and musical family. Yourself, I know, Chris. You obviously knew Greg. Came as a huge shock to everyone. And so our heart just breaks for everyone affected by the loss of Greg Lee. Anything you wanna share about Greg?
Yes.
Before you begin, though, I think he was enormously likable.
Yeah.
You could tell from the impact.
He was very much like an extroverted.
I didn't realize.
Yes. A friend, and I'm a huge fan of Hepcat and Greg's work, and a terrible loss to the world and our community. We deeply feel it. Hepcat and Greg's influence on, I would say, the awareness of rocksteady and Jamaican ska in the world cannot be overstated.
Yeah,
I think without people of, I guess, my generation having embraced this music, it might not have the position it does today. And no band has raised the bar higher in that department than Hepcat.
It's so true. It's a spectacle on stage, and
especially in the United States.
Yes,
right. Across the 52 states, and that's a fair statement.
Yes.
And Greg, directly a great performer, a great writer, a great vocalist, a great dresser, a great dancer.
A man of style.
I have no claim to be a great dresser or a great dancer, but I'm a huge fan of Hepcat, and I have to say that Scientific, that album in particular, really was. It came out at a special time in my life where I was kind of between King Apparatus and solo stuff, but the solo stuff had not come into place yet. So it was a bit of like, what's going on moment of life. But that album and songs like Keep On, Keeping On really were like something that uplifted me and gave me strength in times that were uncertain. And I've listened to that album a couple times in the last couple weeks.
Yeah, as have I. Do you remember the first time that you saw Greg and Hepcat?
Yes. So that was in '93.
Okay.
King Apparatus, my group from Toronto, had come down to California twice. The very first time we came from British Columbia and we came down, we played a show in San Francisco, and then we went to Utah and didn't come to LA on that trip. Next time was the beginning of '93. We did a West Coast tour with the Toasters.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then we came back in May of '93 and did West Coast with Skank and Pickle.
Mhm.
And then we came back in July of '93 and we were doing more like a national tour with Dancehall Crashers. And they didn't want to do California dates as part of that tour because for them, they could pick and choose opportunities for California separately. But Elise, who was managing Hepcat at the time,
Yep.
from Dancehall Crashers, she arranged for us some California shows, including a show where we played with Hepcat at Whiskey A Go Go.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So not only for me, I'd heard the Hepcat, I guess Right on Time was pretty new at that moment.
Right.
Or not
Yep.
Right on Time, Out of Nowhere.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's right. Yep.
And but I'd heard the song on California Ska Quake, and so we did a show at Whiskey, and on that show, Alex wasn't there. I think he was doing acting stuff.
Yes.
My first exposure to Hepcat was with Greg as the front man alone.
Yeah.
And later, of course, Alex is a great part of Hepcat. But there were times when he couldn't be with them. And that, for me, I never felt like, oh, it's missing something, because my first exposure was with Greg
Right.
alone.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
He can run any stage on his
right.
own. And so after that show that night, we went out to, Elise was living in Venice, and we just hung out at the beach. And that was my first moment stepping onto Venice Beach.
Wow.
From Hepcat, Greg was the only member who came out to hang out with us. So Greg and
got to
a
hang
few other
out.
people came out to hang out with King Apparatus at Venice Beach after our show at the Whiskey. So I remember him really well from that. And from that point on, we were always in touch and connected.
Yeah.
Sounds like Greg, all right.
It
Yeah.
really does.
Yes.
He was great at keeping in touch.
Yes,
and,
man. But maybe we
Yeah.
shift focus for a little bit and talk
Yes.
about your childhood. Born and raised in Canada, I'll let you take it from there. And your first exposure to music generally, but more specifically now, Jamaican music.
Okay. So yes, I was born and raised in Toronto, Canada. And both of my parents are very musical. They're both school teachers by profession, but they both played piano. They both sang in choirs. My father played guitar. My mom played violin, although she wasn't doing a lot. I heard her maybe a handful of times. It's like I used to play trumpet in high school, but I haven't touched it in years. My mom was the choir leader at her elementary school. So from an early age, when I was 8, I'd be up, your bedtimes now, but she'd be up working on material for the school choir.
Mhm.
And so I'd hear her downstairs playing piano and singing. So all along, I was exposed to music. I was brought up around it. And although technically not a Jamaican song, I would say my first exposure to Caribbean music would have been Yellowbird, because that was one of the songs that my mother in her elementary choir, that was part of their repertoire.
Yeah.
So I heard her singing Yellowbird when I was just a child.
Mhm.
And other than that, I really remember, I can see clearly now when it was on the radio. That probably is the first, and I guess is that Jamaican music? Yeah, it is, because it's the
Yeah, it was
like
recorded in Jamaica.
Leslie Kong's
Right.
studio
Right.
Right.
group
Right.
back in Johnny Nash. Yes. So
Not
that,
hardcore, more between hybrid and reggae.
Right.
But it's a very serious and positive song. So that's why it's so
Yeah.
hard to define.
Right.
but that would have been the same backing band, the studio band that was doing things with the Maytals, right? I think
I'm
so.
not sure who backed it. Johnny Nash, I know Bob Marley was involved with Johnny Nash when he went down to Jamaica to
Right.
record those. I can't remember.
Right.
And then I think the first time I would have heard Bob Marley would actually have been the Eric Clapton, I Shot the Sheriff.
Oh,
It was on the radio.
Right.
right.
Apart from those random things like Obla Di, Obla Da, My
Yep,
father
yep.
played me a lot of Beatles
Sure.
when I was a kid.
Right.
I don't know if I remember exactly the first time to hear true Jamaican music, other than those examples.
Mhm.
However, in Toronto, as I'm sure Junior will already know, it's a large Jamaican community.
Very
And
much.
I believe that the third largest outside of Jamaica in the world is in Toronto. And a lot of Jamaican musicians, as well as everybody, emigrated to Toronto. So people like Jackie Mittoo, Leroy Sibbles, for a while, Stranger Cole lived there, Alton Ellis,
Lord Tanamo.
Mhm.
Animo, yeah.
Yeah.
We should include Lynn Tate. We can claim
Right.
Lynn Tate, even though it's Trinidadian, but based on this conversation, we
Yes,
can
yes.
claim Lynn Tate. He lived
True.
in Canada as well.
True.
Yes, yes.
Even though it's from Trinidad.
And he was up in Montreal, where
Mm.
Vernon Maytone is now.
Right.
Mhm.
So
But at what age did you realize that there were these reggae and ska rocksteady legends living up in Canada?
it's a good question. I mean, I was getting into not early enough, but
Right.
I think it's like one of those things, like if you live in LA these days, or in the last 20, 30 years, you've been blessed that there was a thing going on and you happened across it, and that's how you got exposed to it. So I would say that in the 80s is when I first really became aware of the Jamaican
Okay.
active community.
Yeah.
So I was aware of reggae. I went to a high school that we called like junior high. We didn't have middle school in Canada,
Yeah.
but starting from 7th grade through being a senior. And so usually that would be split into 2 schools. So I started at that school in 78 in 7th grade. And the seniors, who would have been 17, 18 years old, when I first got there, they were listening to Genesis and stuff like that. The music from the 70s. But within a year or two, when punk rock really like got established, and two-tone and that type of music from Britain a lot was really getting the people who were programming our school dances, the seniors, they were into this stuff. So I was hearing this when I was pretty young, like 12 years old. And they'd definitely be playing like Bob Marley jamming and stuff like that in the high school dances. I went away to London, Ontario for college in 84, was there for 4 years. And that's where King Apparatus started. So I became aware of reggae and two-tone separately, but around the same time. And it took me a minute to understand how they were connected. In Toronto, especially, but in Canada more than the US, I think at the time we were very attuned to like British culture. We were a common country. And so I was hearing the two-tone stuff and just generally British music of that new wave era more than I was hearing about like hip hop and stuff like that. And so through the two-tone and say UB40, British Jamaican music, that was my primary exposure initially, I would say.
Yeah.
Was also aware of Bob Marley because he was international superstar Bob Marley. Everybody knew that, but I didn't know at all like the artists who are more obscure than Bob Marley. I would have known Peter Tosh's name initially, but I would not have, like, first time I heard the Specials doing Monkey Man, I would never have heard of the Maytals.
Sure.
And so when I came back from college in 88, now I was of age to go to shows. And that was when I started really seeing the shows that were in the Jamaican community. So in 88, I remember I saw, it was a Sunsplash satellite tour. They sent out a package around North America to promote Sunsplash. And the 2 headliners were Toots and Yellowman.
Nice.
And, you know, growing up, you never see the water. The fish doesn't see the water kind of thing. I was just fortunate to be in the city where I could go to a show like that. And I would say there probably were about 1,200 people at a show like that.
Wow.
Only
What's that?
1,200.
Well, I mean, I'll follow it up by saying I would say most of the people there were in the Jamaican community.
Okay.
Because in the late 80s, artists like Yellowman and the Maytals were not mainstream, typical Canadians. Just it wasn't on their radar.
Right.
But I had become a reggae fan, not nearly the degree that I know about it now. But it was when I heard it, I'm like, I like this, and I kept with it. And it was not easy to find out about things back then. I remember being in college, and there was a guy who had a reggae radio show for an hour or two on the campus radio station, CHRW. You'd be there with your cassette, recording the show and listening.
Those were the days.
Oh, yes.
And you'd listen back, and you'd hope that he'd back announce the track so you could.
Sure. Yeah.
What was it? There was no database. There was no YouTube or Spotify to find out about these things.
Much more difficult to learn about it.
So let's, in a sense, now switch direction and talk about King Apparatus. What year was it formed? And two questions in one. And what are some of the career highlights to the best of your memory?
Okay, so we formed in 1987 in my last year in college, and we continued into 95. And that era ended. We did a little reunion stuff in Canada around 2000 and 2001, and that's the last time we've done anything.
But let me rudely interrupt you. So for the benefit of the members and their family, can you say who they are, since they have names?
Sure. So from the start, I would say we were a group of students. And in the first year or two, a lot of people came and went. But there was a core of Sam Tallow is the lead guitarist, Mitch Girio is the bass player, and I was the vocalist.
Okay.
The three of us were in it from the start till the end.
And you were all college students?
When we formed, yes. I was at University of Western Ontario doing English Lit and philosophy. Sam and Mitch were at Fanshawe College, where they were studying in the MIA, Music Industry Arts program. They were studying to be studio engineers and producers.
Oh, nice.
And so they had access to 2 8-track studios at their school, and part of their curriculum was to make recordings.
That's cool. Very
so we had access to studio time for free.
Amazing.
Wow.
And, you know, a lot of time, and with band members who were training on this equipment.
Nice.
And also understood what we were trying to do, our vibe. Because sometimes I think there were other times when we would go into a studio back in those days when typical studio engineers were not very well versed in ska music or reggae music, and they're making rock music or country music or something, and to try to, and even we're experienced in how to say in words to people, well, we're looking for this type of tone on the snare drum, a little more 2K over on the vocal. I had no idea about any of that stuff. It's just like, it was great to have people inside the band who had the skills to make recordings that exactly with the vibe we wanted. So yes, Sam and Mitch and I were the original core, and career highlights, definitely a couple come to mind. So we, our first album we recorded and released in 1991.
Right.
And we had started to be a full-time touring band in 1990. We had won a battle of the bands.
Whereabouts?
In Hamilton, Ontario.
Okay.
45 minutes out of Toronto, where Sam lived. He was from Hamilton originally. So even before it was King Apparatus, we didn't have the name, and Mitch wasn't in it yet, but Sam's brother was playing bass and another guy was playing drums. We won a battle of the band where we got like 15 hours of studio time at a studio called Grant Avenue, which had been started by Daniel Lanois, who is from Hamilton. You know Daniel Lanois?
No, sir.
Yes, I know the name. Yeah.
So he was already working with U2 and people like that. He wasn't at Grant Avenue anymore, but those people had walk through the doors. So we won 15 hours, and we recorded three songs, and then we started to had this guy managing us for a while, Graham, and one year he entered one of them into the the homegrown contest for CFNY, which was like the K-Rock of Toronto, the modern alternative rock, the cool station, the only one that wasn't like hard rock or country or top 40. And so the first year, nothing happened. Second year, he submitted a second of these three that we'd recorded at a nice studio. And that one was, as a result of listener response, got some traction. And so we were out on the road in 1990. It was our first year of being on the road when this track started to get some traction on CFNY. And we came back, and it was like the end of the year, and they were having a homegrown contest showcase where maybe 7 or 8 bands that were part of the CD they were compiling. There was no ultimate winner, but a group of people were on the CD, the CFNY homegrown, and some of them were at the showcase. And at the time, like the end of the 80s, there was a lot of, like, I want to say jingly jangly music is how we used to describe it. A lot of REM influence and stuff like that.
Right.
And we had just come off of like some national touring. So we were really tight, and we were high energy dance music. So compared to these bands,
I was going to say, you must have really stuck out.
we rocked the house. And from that moment on, CFNY loved us because, and as a result of this, it was in December, close to Christmas time, that song, Made for TV, actually became the #1 song on the CFNY chart.
That's huge.
And
that's great.
I don't remember which song it was, but the week before it had been a U2 song. So
wow, that's a great company.
This is the kind of thing, like, people are calling us up. I heard your song on the radio.
Wow.
Yes.
So we had really good fortune with that. We had this year, we had just started to tour. We had an agent. Now he could tell every buyer across Canada they get a #1 song in CFNY.
Sure. So that must have helped.
It was what a stroke of luck.
Yeah,
indeed.
Right. There. So, and then you mentioned earlier when we were talking about Hepcat and Greg, some of the touring that you did, right? Did you do full U.S. tours?
We did a couple, yes. I'll finish off one more connected.
Yes, highlights, yes.
So we recorded our album in 91. Our original drummer, who had left to become a full-time studio producer, produced our first album in a nice studio where in another suite, they were mixing the sound for the Rolling Stones concert film. Like, this was a great studio. And the deal was we had 3 weekends to record, 2 to record, 1 to mix.
Right.
And from Friday at 6 till Monday morning at 6 morning, we were just like going. So after the second weekend, this was in June. So July 1st is Canada Day. CFNY, again, was having a Canada Day event at Molson Park in Barrie, a little north of Toronto. And there's some footage of us playing at this event. And so we finished on Monday morning. Final tracking was done. Next week we were going to mix, but we had no more time to record. It was done. We'd spent the 2 weekends just grinding it out, and we were really happy. That album I still love. And we drove directly up to Molson Park, about an hour north. Yeah. And I would say maybe like around 1 or 2 in the afternoon, we were the second act to play on their stadium, on the stage, as a result of having done well in their homegrown contest.
Sure.
And for that, I think that the total attendance was about 30,000.
Yeah, that's a massive venue, Molson.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So that we were on front of that might be as big a crowd as I've ever played.
Chances are.
That's great. Do you remember who else played that festival?
So there were some Canadian acts, like Blue Rodeo is a big Canadian act. It's a long time ago. There was another local ska band called Skaface who played first in the day.
I heard the name.
Yeah.
And there was one American act. It was Violent Femmes played on that bill.
Right. Okay. Cool. Yeah.
Other than that, I'm not remembering in the moment. But some
No,
connections.
those are some big accomplishments, big highlights. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. So anyway, now you're asking about touring.
Yeah. I was just asking as far as, so you did tour the US?
Yes. So being in Toronto, we were close to, relatively close to New York. And at the time, Moon Records and Toasters
Sure.
were really, really brewing it up. You know, it wasn't yet as big as it became, but I would say that we were probably going down to New York as early as 1990.
Oh, okay.
And all Moon Records would already have been in place, but we would have been playing shows with the Toasters and going into America for like weekends. Okay, we're going to do, maybe we have a little run with Mustard Plug or something.
Mhm.
We played with Mustard Plug in '89. So we went on like Ypsilanti and Grand Rapids and Detroit or something like that.
Right.
Mhm.
We did lots of little forays. We also would bring up bands like the Toasters to do some Southern Ontario plus Montreal, because we had a really good following in our area.
Yeah.
And for US fans to come that really people in Canada didn't know yet, because it wasn't on the radio and there was no internet, to play with the band that had a following that was similar,
Right.
help them out. And so there was a lot of trading off in that regards in the scene. We did the same with Let's Go Bowling. We had them come up to Ontario because they had come through once with Potato Five,
That tour, right.
I think in '89. And that was my first time seeing a California band.
Okay.
And they weren't properly billed in advance. So we weren't playing that show, but we came to see Potato Five. And then all of a sudden there's this crew of like rude boys, really sharp dressed. And I didn't recognize anyone.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like the type of scene where you go up and it's like, hi, how are you? I don't recognize you. Who are you? Let's be friends. Everybody's like, kind of strutting ska scene style.
Right.
So the local opener finished, and then Let's Go Bowling got up on stage, and I was not prepared for what a band I was seeing. They were fantastic, and like, wow. So I bought their 7-inch, the Route 69.
Yeah.
7-inch is what they had at the time, and they had a cassette, I think, as well. And I totally got into it, and I told our agent, like, when these guys are coming around again, we got to bring them up. The same thing. They slept on the floor of my apartment, like the 10 of them, for a week and a half.
Yeah.
Later, that was Skank and Pickle. They crashed at my apartment a couple of times, and then they brought us to the West Coast, and we did stuff with them. So it was that type of grassroots connection.
So important.
That really gave us entree to the US scene. And in no small part, the Toasters and Moon Records. We were releasing in Canada on an indie label called Raw Energy, which had major distribution in Canada through A&M. So that was a good situation. We were in record stores, and stuff was getting played on the radio to a certain extent.
Yep.
In the US, we were unknown. And even at the
What
time,
did I ask you though about your parents? How did your parents respond from college into a band? Granted, you had a #1 song, so that brought a lot of joy and pleasure and status. Granted,
yes. So, so my parents split when I was really young. I grew up with my mom, and for the first couple of years after college, I was already in the band before I graduated, and then I was working at a music magazine for a couple of years, which was a great experience as far as being a young musician and learning about how does the music industry run.
what were you doing for the magazine?
I was writing and being a charts. Well, I was there 2 years. It was a small office. The two guys who started it, Walt Grealis and Stan Cleese, were older. They were probably in their late 50s, early 60s at the time. The two of them had started the Juno Awards.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, familiar.
Yeah.
And RPM Weekly was the magazine. It was a trade magazine.
I remember that. Yeah.
More like Billboard than Rolling Stone. It was a music industry trade magazine. So we did charts. And when I got there, ahead of me was Graham, who started to manage King Apparatus. And I was his charts assistant. So I would call radio stations and like, can you fax us your chart? or calling rack jobbers for their weekly shipments and
Yeah.
retail stores to
That's
compile statistics, then to hand to Graham, who would move things on the chart and determine what was the number one song of the week and
Right.
such.
Right.
And so after Graham had always wanted to start a record label, he started managing King Apparatus. And so for the first year I was there, he stayed there. The second year he left because now it was conflict of interest. He couldn't be at this magazine and run a record label. So I got his job. So when I was maybe 23, I was charts editor at Canada's oldest trade magazine.
That's cool.
The parents couldn't ask for more.
Yeah. So sometimes things have just kind of happened in a really fortuitous way.
Yes. Yes.
And so then, now what was your original question?
So your mom was.
Oh, your parents. Yeah, your parents.
Well,
Mom
okay.
and dad.
So what I was saying was,
If you have
I was,
brothers and
for the
sisters.
first couple of years that I was out of school, I was working a job, and I had a degree in English lit and philosophy. I'd done some journalism in college, and here I was working at a magazine and making money and surviving. And then when the band went full time, we had good fortune where, again, we were surviving and making progress. And I think at the time she really would have preferred that I became a lawyer or something.
But I didn't want to leave your dad out of the equation either.
There was I was never discouraged. I was always supported in it. And I know my father was really excited about it. I think of the two, he was the more like musician at heart. And one time he was so excited because he lived in a smaller town, Belleville, a couple hours east from Toronto. And he had gone into there. He was a chatty kind of guy and a real music head. So he was in the record store chatting with the people there. And somehow it came to them like, oh, yes, my son plays in King Apparatus. And they're like, oh, who's your son? It's like, Chris Murray. And the guy's like, this is Chris Murray's dad. He felt like he really loved it. And so, yes, I was really fortunate in that regard that my parents,
I'm sure.
I mean, if they had said, don't do it, probably would have made me do it harder. But
yeah. So
it was nice to have support.
So with all that and the accolades, why in '95 did King Apparatus come to an end?
Well, the real short answer is the guitarist Sam said he was through, and we'd been working really hard. We were touring hardcore, and we didn't always have hotels or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Guys in a Ford Econoline van with a roof box,
of course,
years on end, and it was going well, but it wasn't like we were getting rich. We were making a living, and it was exciting times, like the first half of the '90s, to be active in the American ska scene.
Right. But it was a grind. Yeah.
It was definitely a grind. And so at that point, Mitch and I decided that, well, without Sam, it really wouldn't be King Apparatus. So we'll just wrap it up. And so we finished with, we had already some obligations. We'd started to book the next tour, and Sam said, okay, well, I'll come and I'll do this tour. We've made an obligation, we'll fulfill that. And that was in '94, the final US tour we did. And for that, we had the core 3 original members. And that was the end of '93 was when that Skavuvi tour happened.
Yes.
It was a package with Special Beat, Selector, Scatolites, and Toasters, and regional support. And so we had played on Toronto and Detroit.
Nice. Yep.
King Apparatus. And then we were taking a couple of months off for the hardcore winter. Like, if you're a Canadian band, you don't want to be on the road December, January, February. It's dangerous. It's unpleasant.
Right.
It's so cold. Literally, people just don't go out as much.
Sure.
Diminishing returns. And so King Apparatus had already been coming down to California, and I'd been exposed to Hepcat and Jump with Joey and Ocean 11 and seeing this scene down here, and understood that King Apparatus was wrapping up. I'm like, but I'm all about ska. So
Mhm.
where it's going
Right,
on,
right.
that's where I want to be. And so we worked it out that our final tour was quite an epic tour, maybe 12 weeks, 3 months, something like that.
Mm,
It started and ended in San Diego.
okay.
And the three original members, well, I had already come down, and part of my task was that I needed to recruit from the California scene a drummer, keyboardist, and a rhythm guitarist to fill out the lineup for this tour.
Okay.
And so we had a good connection with Let's Go Bowling, and right away, I drove solo from Toronto to Santa Cruz, uh, where Skavuvi Tour had now worked its way out here. So we played it, and then a couple weeks later, we had finished our thing. Skavuvi had played some cities and ended up out here. So I was like, I'm going to be there. And I took the King Apparatus van and just drove for like 2-3 days and got there for sound check. Saw all the California shows. I was like a deadhead of
Wow.
Skavuvi
That's
Tour.
so great.
And on the second date was San Francisco, and a bunch of guys from Let's Go Bowling came out to the show. This is perfect. My second day here. Darren and Adam, the keyboardist and drummer from Let's Go Bowling.
Yep.
By the way, oh, King Apparatus is doing tour. You need people to go. We'll do it. Second day there, I had like, and they're like, and we'll get Dave, the guitarist, to come as well.
So they played. So they played as fill-in members.
Yes, except a couple of weeks before the tour, Dave, the guitarist, said, I'm sorry, I can't do it.
Mm.
So I was already in Fresno rehearsing with Darren and Adam. And pretty soon, Sam and Mitch and a road manager were going to drive down to join for rehearsals for maybe 10 days or something like that, and then hit the road.
Right.
And we didn't have a guitarist. So I'm like, do you guys know someone who could do it? And they're like, there's this kid, he plays in a band, Checkmate. And like, Brian. I'm like, well, let's see if he can do it. It was Brian Dixon.
Yes.
Was, I think, 19 at the time. And probably had just finished high school, something like that. He was young. And Checkmate was a young, traditional ska band at the time in Fresno. Yeah. And he came out on quite short notice, and he worked. That was my first getting to know Brian Dixon, and we had a tight connection for many years. Yeah. And as he was aware of King Apparatus, maybe he had seen us at some show in Fresno before. And I'll say that we were a little bit progressive in the modern ska thing. We would experiment with time signatures and do things that were intentionally trying to be creative and progressive in the modern ska wave. Because I think that was really at the time what was going on. Bands were really
experimenting. Yeah?
The same way now, but oh, Bim Scalabim has a new album. You're listening. What did they do? Kind of like, oh, the Beatles are listening to Pet Sounds, and now we're doing Sgt. Pepper's in our own way. It was kind of like that attitude.
Right.
So he worked hard. He nailed it, Brian. So we went out with those three Californians for our final U.S. tour.
Yeah.
So when did you decide to go solo, become a solo performer? Was it at the Venice Shoreline, Chris, or somewhere along the line?
So it was a bit of a process. It was not like a switch that got flipped. Things happened as they did. As already I've given some examples. Things just happened in a certain way.
Right.
So at the end of that tour, I'd started out here, and I had the King Apparatus band, and we did 3 months a tour. We toured up the West Coast to British Columbia. We flew to the Yukon for the Frostbite Festival in February, did some dog sledding, and flew back to Vancouver, toured east through Canada to Toronto, flew from Toronto to Austin, played South by Southwest, flew back to Toronto, toured to the east of Canada, would have entered probably Maine through New Brunswick, toured down the East Coast, down to New Orleans, then up to Chicago, then down to the Mountain West, returning to where we started in California, a large tour. And at the end of that, we're going to do a little thing in Canada later, but there was nothing immediately that I had to do. And here I was in California in early 94, mid 94, when things were really exciting here.
Sure.
And again, a real fortuitous moment happened. So on that tour in New York, I had run into this guy, Joe, who I knew from Buffalo, close to Toronto, as part of a skinhead scene that would come up to Toronto to see King Apparatus. He was now working a bit with Moon Records and as a driver for Skatalites. And so he said to me, hey, I'm going to be in California in May with Skatalites, and I need one more driver and a vehicle. And I'm like, I'm going to be in California in May with the King Apparatus van. I'll do that. And he's like, okay. And so the tour was coming up. I was living in a garage in Venice, and I had access to the phone in the house and the bathroom and the kitchen. So it was a real casual situation. And I get a call the night before the tour. They were flying into LAX, and it was Elise Rogers, who was working at Falk and Morrow, who were repping Skatalites at the time. And she had some logistical questions for me. And I said, like, I don't know any of this stuff. You need to talk to Joe about this. And there was a bit of a pause. And she said, Joe's not coming on this tour. I'm like, well, who's tour managing? There was another pause. She's like, you are. Oh. So the night before the tour, I realized I was the tour manager. I was just going to be a guy with a van driving. And so right into the frying pan. And the next day I went to LAX. They rented one minivan because somebody had told them, well, Chris has a van, but it wasn't set up for passengers. We had like flat surfaces to sleep on that were padded. Not good for senior musicians.
So this would have been Tommy, Roland.
Not Lester, but
Not
Lloyd Knibb, Lloyd Brevitt, and Doreen. Plus Devin James was playing guitar.
Yeah. And
Will Clark was playing trombone.
Was Ken on?
Nate Breedlove was on trumpet, and it was Kerry Brown.
Kerry on keys. Yes.
Later went into New York Ska Jazz.
Yeah.
But the good thing is, because of your extensive tour and your experience, things work out fine by you being the manager and the driver. So you're able to carry the duty magnificently well.
So as far as being a tour manager, I had a lot of experience because essentially I was the tour manager with King Apparatus.
Sure.
That aspect of things I was able to take on without a problem. Now, Kerry Brown and his brother Jason, who was on the tour to sell merchandise, had experience with Skatalites. That saved me. Because I had met them briefly, just like, hi, I'm a local guy in Toronto. We're supporting you. They didn't know me. And there were all kinds of special circumstances and within the culture of Skatalites touring that if you didn't know, you needed to know fast. And a great example of that was the first show was a House of Blues Sunset. And of course, everything is really well done. They take care of you. Yes. Conditions are great. They brought some jambalaya, Cajun cuisine for the band to eat.
Right.
It had pork in it.
Ooh.
Now all of a sudden, Brevitt is at the other end of the room, tearing a strip off of the people who brought in the food, who don't understand a word he's saying or why he's upset, but he's going off. And I don't even know what's going on. And Kerry comes over, he's like, Chris, this is what's happening. They brought food that had pork, Brevitt's Rasta. This is a problem. Just go have them bring some other food for him. And so I would go and explain, we need some food without pork for these people. And it was fine. But there were so many moments along that way. There was one time at the hotel, Tommy called me up and he wanted to know, what time do we hit? And I didn't understand his accent. So I kept hearing him say, what time do we eat? And we had just had dinner. I'm like, well, we just ate a little while ago. Are you still hungry? What time do we eat? Well, we had dinner at 9, but I could go get you. What time do we eat? And I'm like, 11:30. I was like, okay. So
Great.
that was a beautiful experience. And
Indeed.
it was about 10 days of touring with those guys.
Yeah.
And
I had
by
no
the end of
idea. Wow.
by the end of that, I knew the people, they knew me, and through the rest of time, that has been a real joy in my life to.
And you of course learned so many Jamaican lingua. What
Yes,
time did you?
Right.
I understand the vocabulary and the accent much better, and a lot of the context as
Yeah.
well.
So staying with the Scatolites real quick, I just recently discovered, and I don't know why I had not prior to 2 weeks ago, I listened to your very insightful and entertaining audio interview with Lloyd Knibb on YouTube, which I encourage everyone to listen to. When was that recorded? You
That
remember?
was
Was that
recorded in,
during the Bluebeat Lounge days?
yes, it would have been 2000. Oh, 1 second. That would have been in 2003. So I'll tie a few things together here. Bluebeat Lounge started in 2003, and it was also the year that Ska Summit happened in Las Vegas.
Yes, right.
Which, for anyone who's not aware of Ska Summit, there is an event, or there was, called Extreme Thing, which was like extreme biking, extreme sports oriented, that always had a musical component to it. In 2003, it was determined that the musical part of it would be branded as Ska Summit. Vince Pileggi was the manager of Real Big Fish, and he had gone to college he was college buddies with the guy who did Extreme Thing, and they brought this together, and it was excellent. They had, I think, in one day, maybe around 20 bands or so,
Right.
2 main stages and 2 side stages. Bands like Selector were on it, and some big, and I think the attendance at the concert was about 10,000, which in 2003 at a Ska, that was,
Yeah.
it was incredible. There was nothing else like that happening. And so for that, I was approached by Kyle and Kelly, who did Ska A Go-Go website.
Oh, yes.
Back in the pre-MySpace days.
Right. Yes.
And Jason Lawless.
Yeah.
And they wanted to do a zine to coincide with Ska Summit.
Okay.
And so they approached me, I think just because I was doing Bluebeat Lounge. And but they didn't know that I'd worked for a couple of years at a music magazine. So I'm like, yes, let's do this. And it was quite intensive. I think it was so intensive because I had a vision for what it could be far beyond what they were even intending. And I was able to like get some stuff done. I could, since I was doing Bluebeat Lounge, I was able to get ads from like Victory Records and Asian Man Records and all the labels that were anything related to ska were happy to pay for some advertising, which meant we could do a color cover and print up a whole bunch, and it wasn't staples like that.
Right.
And it was nice. So what was the original question again?
Your interview with Lloyd Knibb.
Yes.
Yes. So that was done with the intention of being part of a second edition of the Ska World magazine, which actually we only had one edition.
Okay.
After Ska Summit, I think we just didn't have the energy to do another one, and there wasn't such a large opportunity / deadline. So, but that was done with that intention.
Okay.
And,
So it's a couple of years ago then.
No,
21 years ago.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yes. Right.
Additionally, by then you knew him very well because you had worked with him extensively.
Right.
Yes.
So that had to facilitate the interview.
Exactly. I knew him as a friend, and so to do the interview was very easygoing. And he had told, so when they landed at LAX, they had minivans, like passenger minivans for most people. And my van, as I said, wasn't made for that. We had the front driver's seat and the passenger seat. And he looked at that. It was like an old Ford Econoline. He's like, your van that? I'm like, yeah, that's my van. He's like, just one seat here? I'm like, yes. And he's like, it's my seat. I'm like, sure, no problem. And he's like, no, he really made a point of it. That's my seat. The whole tour, that's my seat. His opportunity not to ride shoulder to shoulder with the people he'd been playing with since the 1960s.
Of course.
So for that whole tour, Lloyd Knibb was my passenger.
Wow.
So for 10 days, we hung out one-on-one.
That's so great.
And I had this little boombox in there with just cassettes, mixed cassettes of various stuff. But I had a bunch of old Jamaican stuff, which at the time, it wasn't that accessible.
Sure.
CDs were relatively new.
Right.
Not everything had been reissued yet. And if you were a touring musician, you didn't have the resources to buy rare Jamaican stuff at all. And there was no eBay to do it anyway. But I had these cassettes with old Jamaican music and Lloyd Knibb sitting next to me. So who's on this session? Who's blowing here? Like, did you play on this?
It became like a classroom.
It was 10 days of extensive hanging out with Lloyd Knibb, driving around California, listening to old music.
What an incredible experience.
Yes.
And I think after that, he was one of the more easygoing guy from what I've seen.
Yeah, he was really a nice man. Like a easygoing, friendly personality, quite jovial and happy person, and such a talent. I mean,
Right. We want to switch direction now. The Bluebeat Lounge was extremely important to all of us. It was a platform for not only SoCal ska scene, but for nurturing touring bands from all over the North America, all over North America, including Canada. A lot of people played important role during that time. Louis from Steady Beat during the 90s. I think you essentially took over where he kind of left off. So pick it up from there, right? And you would probably, but Louis was very active, and
and that's where I first saw you, Chris, perform was at one of the Steady Beat shows, maybe even as your combo, but yeah, as Junior mentioned, the take us through the birth of Bluebeat Lounge, because it definitely was timed right after a lot of the Steady Beat and some of the other 90s, let's call it ska, pop punk kind of maybe died down a little bit, right? So take us back to what you remember from the beginning.
For sure. And to lead up, as you mentioned, Luis Correa with Steady Beat had been the real, the main promoter of what we look back on now. That was the rocksteady scene.
Yeah. We should give him proper respect.
Absolutely.
Yes. Like up to that point, even in California, ska hadn't achieved the critical mass where all of a sudden sub-scenes were branching off. Like, as I say, 93, King Apparatus was main support for Hepcat at the Whiskey. Totally different types of music, still under the ska. We were part of the third wave, not playing third wave ska.
Right.
We were contemporaries in a scene where they had a release on Moon Records, and Moon was doing our distribution, and we were label mates, even though our sounds were radically different. And so John Pantel was the agent at Knitting Factory, and I had met him again through Elise Rogers. Earlier in the 90s, the only time I saw Sublime, Dancehall Crashers were supporting, and somewhere in Orange County. And so Elise got in touch with me. She knew I was hanging out in LA, and she's like, "Oh, we have a show. If you're not doing anything, come and hang out." So I went down, and a lot of kids. I don't remember exactly where it was. I didn't know the place that well back then, but I got there with my Thomas guide, and at the end, John Pantel was the promoter. So I met him, and we were hanging out in the parking lot. And so Dancehall Crashers played their sets, and I thought, oh, the show's done. Oh no, there's another band setting up. I'd never heard of Sublime, but 40 Ounces of Freedom was out within like the previous year. And so it was a Sublime show. I'd never heard of them. I saw them. It's the only time I ever saw them. I had no preconception. I was like, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, they really blew me away. And so I guess Fakamaro was repping Sublime as well. So later I'm like, Elise, who was that band? And she's like, oh, that's Sublime. And she handed me a copy of 40 Ounces to Freedom. I heard that. I'm like, again, like that's a masterpiece.
Right. Yes.
And as far as
The formation of Bluebeat came as a result of your connection
yes,
with John.
through Elise, I met John Pansel and we became friends. And later he approached me while he was the agent at Knitting Factory. And he said, oh, come on down. I want to show you this room. And so he brought me down and he showed me the alternate lounge, which I think the legal capacity was like 75. It was quite small. Because there were 3 rooms,
right,
they could be flexible with letting extra bodies in if the overall fire code was within control. So sometimes they put 100, they'd sell 100 tickets for that room. So he brought me in there. It's a small room, but nice. And he's like, I want you to do an artist residency here on Tuesday. And at that time, like I was playing acoustic guitar in ska, and that was still quite an oddball thing.
Right, because but you had not promoted shows up until this point.
No, I mean, with King Apparatus, I had some experience.
Okay.
Involved with putting stuff on and dealing with the business end of shows.
Okay, got it.
So right away, I realized that for this, because I was not a draw to bring people into that room every week at the beginning of 2003. But I had this good friendship with Brian Dixon, who was at the time playing in C-Spot, working with Brad Pate on After Hours. And I guess Agrolites had begun in 2002.
Right.
So he was super active. Plus, he was working at Signet Sound Deluxe, the recording studio, recording a lot of the bands in the steady beat scene.
Right.
And so I went to Brian and I'm like, look, I have this opportunity. I want to make it a thing where it's like a little show. It's not just me, to bring bands in from the scene. So over the first couple of months, Brian was like really key in connecting the bills. So the very first show was C-Spot, and I opened, and so he played. The next week, Vic Ruggiero happened to be around, and so he headlined doing his solo performance, and I opened for that. Third week, it was a Joe Strummer tribute because he had passed in December of 2002, and Vic was still around, and some guys from RX Bandits came up, and also guys from Agrolites came up, and Jesse was playing drums in The Misguided, a punk band.
Oh, right.
They played on the bill on the Joe Strummer thing. So Brian Dixon was all over that one again.
Wow.
The next one, the fourth one in January was After Hours. Then
Incredible all-star project.
the first one of February was Debonaires, who Brian hooked up. I had played with them once, but didn't know them, but he brought them in.
Yep.
And then the 6th week was Agrolites.
Yep.
So Brian said it so that after those first 6 weeks, it was already a scene.
Right. And we're talking 2003.
Yes. And then it was the show that you guys were involved with, Reggae Nucleus.
Yes. In March of 2003, which would have been our 9-year anniversary. Or, I can't remember, one of the anniversaries. Yeah, that was pretty remarkable too. And forever thank you for that opportunity. Right. There was the Reggae Nucleus All-Stars, which had members of Hepcat, which were on a hiatus at that point. Yes. Right. Greg was living down in Costa Rica. And then it was some members of
Jamaica's premier Roastmaster,
and then
Ross Michael headline.
Ross Michael was on the bill.
It was a dream bill.
You were part of it, Chris. No, it was magical.
Yeah,
for sure.
I still have members of that show.
I know. Unfortunately, I don't have video, but there are some good photos that we have.
Yes.
Go has some great photos, and an old HC dude as well. But yeah, that was such a special night.
It was. I had tried to rustle up some Hepcat guys, and it just was like hitting a wall. It wasn't happening. But about a week before the show, I still didn't have it all together. And you were bringing Ross Michael, and I was like, that's amazing. But Dave Fuentes called me, and he talked to people, and he's like, Chris, we're going to do it. So it happened, but like a week before it came together. And that was Greg Narvis, Dave Fuentes, Alex and Destin were singing.
Right.
Roger played keyboards.
Right, Roger up there, yeah.
Antle played trombone.
Right, yep.
And I was a singer. And I think Chuck Farrar did some singing as well.
Chuck was up there, right. Yes.
And I'm probably forgetting Lino played guitar.
Yes, yes.
One of my takeaway from that show is Alex said, Junior, I'm nervous. So, you're an actor, you've done everything in life. See, I'm nervous.
So it had been some years.
And it was very
Played it all.
I think it was one of the first time he had performed without Greg.
Quite possible.
Yes, he had moved away. Basically, I think that the band had stopped.
Yeah, they were hiatus for a long time.
But looking forward, by the end of that year, they had reformed.
Yes.
Yeah, because I think, what's his name? Greg came back.
That show with Reggae Nucleus at Bluebeat
Right.
was the inception of that.
Mhm.
That,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes.
That definitely helped.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And then Chris, we also worked Rico Rodriguez, right? That was a great show. And you had a few other legends that would come through, right? Desmond.
Oh,
That was Desmond's last show, right? Sorry, last show in Los
in the
Angeles.
United States.
Yes. So there were a couple of things. So it was really a great situation. Chris Diaz, who I think is now at Glass House, or was.
Yeah, I know Chris.
Up until he was at Knitting Factory in NoHo.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where he is right now, but he was the agent at Knitting Factory after Pantel had moved on to the agency group or something like that.
Yeah.
And
I think
so, but at that time, Bluebeat was already established and doing really good business for Knitting Factory in their small room.
Yes.
And
sometimes
and for this scene too. For the scene as well, because then bands from across the states were stopping in, Chicago.
yes,
I remember that. I fill in the gap, Eric.
There was a lot.
all over.
A beautiful thing about Bluebeat Lounge was that because it was a small room and it was a door deal. First of all, I was never on the hook for guarantees. It was a door deal. We split the money, and Knitting Factory took a cut of the door. They were happy, and it was consistently pretty good. Sometimes it was amazing. And so that meant that I was risk-free.
Yes.
And I could program.
Which is always the best way to be a promoter.
It allowed me to do a service that I otherwise could not have done, where, we have a band that no one has heard of from Tennessee, and they want a show in LA, and I can put them on a bill. No one knows who they are. Well, we'll check out their MySpace. And, like the scene, the Bluebeat scene was definitely, it was open to all styles of ska.
Yes.
And I had come directly out of a modern rock influenced third wave era ska band. So I had love for that stuff, as well as the traditional sounds that were really the core of what was, I would say, the main audience of Bluebeat Lounge prefers. So if a band,
but I want to put you on the spot, and can you mention some of the bands, US bands that came through? No, that we mentioned the international.
Yes. So tons. I just, at one point I had added up that over the 7 years of it, there were about close to 400 shows.
Wow.
And more than 700 different acts that played. And so sometimes there would be shows in the main space, for instance, like the Rico Rodriguez show, that would be a situation where Knitting Factory would have, or Desmond Decker had done a direct deal with the headliner, and then approached me, let's brand this as a Bluebeat Lounge event. Right. You put together a support package, and we're taking the risk. And we give you a budget to pay the support acts. Every condition was perfect. And so definitely Desmond Decker was a huge one of those. Selector show was really a heavyweight show.
I didn't make that.
I missed that one.
Scatolites were definitely part of that.
Yeah.
one of the craziest ones. So Pantel was repping Tokyo Ska Paradise.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And they had House of Blues Sunset show set up with a perimeter radius clause or whatever. So they couldn't play anywhere a certain distance within a certain time to this.
Right.
Pantel called me up. He's like, do you want to do a secret show with Tokyo Ska Paradise Orchestra at Bluebeat Lounge? I'm like, yeah. He's like, but you can't promote it. It has to be only word of mouth because it's against the conditions of their contract. I'm like, okay. We'll just call it like this. Some band you've never heard of is playing this day, but we'll let people know. And so we moved it into the middle space, which I think had capacity about 350 for a show that we couldn't announce. And we knew it was going to be ramped, and it was.
Yeah.
The morning of it, I get a call. Somebody somewhere in the House of Blues world caught wind of it.
Oh, no.
And it was, again, like 2 hours before the show that I heard they're actually going to do it. Because it looked to me like I might have to, like, all these people I told, like, it didn't happen. And people would show up, but they played. And then, long story short with that, they took a cut in their pay from House of Blues so that they could play the Bluebeat Lounge show, because the truth of it, the combo played support at the House of Blues show, which was packed. It didn't suffer from the Bluebeat Lounge show at all. I would say at least half of the audience were Japanese people, the House of Blues. And it might have been
back nights?
Yes, within the same week, definitely.
So I was at one of those shows.
Wow.
So that was like a $25, $30 ticket or something.
Yeah, that's wild.
The ska kids couldn't afford that. But Tokyo wanted to play to the scene. They knew this was like an expensive show and it was going to do well. And they had support from Sony Japan. So I think some of the tours maybe even like function a bit as lost leaders, because the prestige for a Japanese band to come and rock Hollywood is big, and it pays off in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
They chose to take less money for their official show so that I paid them $800.
Right.
What?
Well,
which was all the money that came through the door.
but they knew that was the right thing to do.
So why you weren't able to announce? Because it was after or before?
It was like too close in time. It was a couple of days, 1 or 2 days before their official show, and it was in the same city. And part of the contract for the House of Blues show was this is your LA play.
Right. Who did you want to book and not able to? Was there someone that you tried and for whatever reason just didn't work out? Any of them stick out?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I mean, there never was.
If not,
I would love to have had Jump with Joey.
Okay.
At the time, I don't think that there was any active presence. I would love to have had Hepcat.
Okay.
By that time, of course, they were selling out wherever they wanted to play.
Yeah, the minute they reunited.
Right. But you had Joey with his All-Stars, though. I do remember.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But so many great shows.
Incredible. So you said there were 400 shows in 7 years.
Yeah, so it was a weekly show.
700 acts. Wow.
It was crazy.
And you still didn't mention any of the local acts.
Okay, so wow, there were
so many. It's going to be unfair, but at least. Maybe perhaps
I mentioned the first 6 weeks were really strong with Agrolites and C-Spot and After Hours, Vic Ruggiero.
I'm talking about people from Chicago, New York, Texas.
Deals Gone Bad came, a band that Go Jimmy Go from Hawaii was, I would say maybe the LA scene at the time, in that spirit of the real ska. We don't want ska punk, we don't want third wave. They love the traditional ska. So it was, and they were, I'd say, as an audience, welcoming to bands. Oh, there's a ska punk band from New Jersey that we don't know, and they're playing today. But we're here because it's our hang.
Right.
And we're not, it's not our thing, but we're giving them love.
Yeah.
But the bands that they truly fell in love with were bands like Go Jimmy Go from Hawaii and Deal's Gone Bad from Chicago. I think
Mhm.
Westbound Train was
Yes,
another big
Father
time.
Land.
They came
Yeah,
regularly.
yeah, yeah.
Yes, and bands like that were bringing the type of roots sound that people here were all about. Really were warmly embraced.
Indeed.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I want to take you to Sierra Nevada World Music Festival and perhaps ask you to share some highlights from your performance with the Agrolites when they're back. None other than,
Prince Buster.
none other than.
What a great time in June of 2003, right?
That was a crazy time.
And how did you become part of that entourage?
So the core backing unit was Agrolites. Previously, Rhythm Doctors had backed Prince Buster, and then they had morphed into Agrolites.
Yeah.
And so I didn't see the first performance, but I presume that they had some horns and augmentation to the unit, to the material. So this time around, they had
It was
Tom.
definitely more robust this time, though.
They had Tom Cook from Debonaires on trombone, Aton now from Western Standard Time, but at the time from Allenton's and Full Spectrum on trumpet. And there was a sax player, I forget the name of,
right.
but it was then the Agrolites with the addition of Dan Bower as a second keyboardist. And I was playing harmonica because a lot of those old ska things had that going on. And we had one rehearsal.
Respect.
Yes, we had one rehearsal with Prince Buster, but we had rehearsals in town without him to prepare for the time. And for those, I would stand in as the vocalist.
Oh, nice.
The harmonica stuff, it's like, give me the key. I didn't need to rehearse. So I led the group through the songs. And that was at Angels Camp, that location, right?
Yes, the second
No, the
location.
second one.
Yeah, no, it was Angels Camp.
No, I'm saying the second one. He was part of the second one.
Right. But at Angels.
I don't remember the exact location.
No, it was
no, Angels Camp. No, Frogtown was the first one.
All right, then it was Angels Camp.
Okay. One. So they had a separate building for rehearsals.
I remember.
Where we were scheduled to do a rehearsal.
Hot like hellfire.
Yeah.
And of course, everything was running on Jamaican time. And they had something going on that year where they were trying to pair artists from different, because it's a world music festival. It's not only reggae, but they had this English folk musician, an older gentleman, whose name I don't remember, who was collaborating with Horsemouth and Fully Fullwood.
Okay.
They had put them together as like, here's a special moment in the festival. So they were the rehearsal before us, and they were running late, but Prince Buster hadn't shown up, so it was all good. But so that was a special day. I show up and this close to Horsemouth, watching him play drums. And finally they wrap up and they cut out, and Prince Buster's still not there, and we're well behind schedule. But we set up and we start playing to warm up and be ready for the moment he shows up. And again, I'm leading the band through some songs just to warm up. And I think we did Blazing Fire, technically a Derek Morgan song, but part of the battle with Prince Buster. And so this building had like those barn doors that open out like that. And I was kind of standing facing into the room at the doors, and I was singing Blazing Fire. I finished, and I turned, and then walking up the grass was Prince Buster and his entourage coming up, and the band's still playing. They don't see him yet because of the angle of the door. And then he walks in the room, and I hand him the microphone, and he sings the next verse, and the band doesn't stop. So that was my a key moment of life where I sang Blazing Fire with Prince Buster.
Well, I tell you, I have to give Warren credit for bringing Prince Buster here.
Yeah.
It was a sell. And credit to myself for taking the challenge on. I said, Warren, he's resting in eternity. I said, Warren, there's one artist people from coast to coast want to see here. He said, who's that? Prince Buster. But I won't tell you what he said in between. I said, you have to bring him. He said, okay, I'll think. And he brought him the first time. I wasn't able to see him. And then he brought him again the following year, and I was able to go. But really,
Thank you
the
for
credit to
pushing
Boyne, because no one else west of the Mississippi
Yeah.
River would take that chance.
No, it's so
But it was very pricey.
yeah.
Yes, and I guess, you know, as a producer that had a lot of success, he probably didn't have the urgency to work the way a lot of musicians
True.
did. And so, yeah, it's true. He was very selective in what he did.
Mhm.
Those were that was a magical, yeah, and nice footage on YouTube that people can watch as
Yes,
well.
that whole set is there.
The entire set, yes.
Yeah.
You can see
Moment of history.
Chris Murray in action.
Yeah, man.
Sticking with the legends.
Wow.
Chris, you hosted a series of legends rehearsals at your house.
Yes,
On top of the hill, right?
On top of the hill.
Yes.
Are you still there?
yes.
Oh, nice.
Amazing.
Nice, nice.
So in the room where Chris is
This
right
room.
now. So
Yeah.
most of them were with the Expanders during a time where they backed the likes of Alton Ellis, Ethiopian Leonard Dillon, Pat Kelly, just to name a few. Take us through if you have any stories about those sessions. And you probably have a lot. So maybe just share a couple.
Okay. And so also you mentioned Rico Rodriguez. He was here
Enrico.
first,
Sorry, yeah. Yes.
set with the combo and friends backing.
Right.
And I remember at the Leonard Dillon rehearsal, Stranger Cole came just to hang out. So I was like, these things were blowing my mind. And so the first of them was Alton Ellis. And as I mentioned, he lived in Toronto for a while. So I got to see him perform in Toronto. It would have been around 1990 at a Jamaican event at Varsity Arena, which was part of U of T. I went to a high school that was affiliated with U of T. So I had skated on the rink. And now that's where the reggae show was happening. And I think that Bob Andy was there and like a bunch of vintage artists who many decades closer to the original time. And at the time, the only song I knew of Alton Ellis was Dance Crasher, which was on a compilation that had come out. So I know that name, that's the guy, that's Dance Crasher. And I was working at that music magazine. So I had a card from a music magazine with my name on it. So I was able to talk my way backstage. And he's in like the dressing room where you'd put on your pads to play hockey, where I'd put on my pads to play hockey on that rink. And he's just sitting there, and I go and I get to hang out with him for a little bit and just say, oh, I play in a ska band that's local. It's like a different kind of music. But anyway, I'm excited to see the show. And when he came here, I was able to say, oh, I met you at that show at Varsity Arena. He's like, oh, I know that show. And he's like, that was the first time Gregory Isaac came to Toronto.
Oh, wow.
So that was a nice moment of connection from Toronto to here.
But you know, to Alton's credit, at that rehearsal, I think everyone was on edge. Perhaps out of reverence and respect, they were just worried about him. And Alton listened to the first song. He said, you guys good, man. Guess what? Just give me the intro and the outro. I don't have to sing. And all the songs. He said, you guys in California good. Because of course he had been here before, but was really and truly pleased with the performance of the backing band. He said, no, I don't need to sing all the songs.
You should show.
Introduction, outtroduction. And he did that through the entire set. And everyone was so relaxed.
We should show the visual just for people who are watching.
And to Boris, the promoter.
Right. So Boris, the promoter, correct. So this was in June of 2006, and it was the Hollywood Ska and Reggae Fest Part 1. Yes. It was 5 legends inside Hollywood's Fonda Theater. Alton Ellis, Derek Morgan, Pat Kelly, Dennis Al Capone, Owen Gray, and the backing bands were, as we mentioned, Expanders, but also LA All-Star Review, Kingston Ska Collective.
Right.
We had Junor Francis and Boss Harmony and Tom Chastain. Yeah, this was amazing. This was amazing.
Back in time, could be in the next 2 years, be 2 decades.
Right. Yes.
And I think
one of the shows of the decade. A lot of people are saying it was a show of the decade.
I just watched recently your interview with Steady 45's guys.
Yes.
And something that they were saying really relates to this moment where, for instance, Alton Ellis had come before, was backed by more of a reggae formation band, rather than of our rocksteady scene.
Right.
And I think that we've all seen like lots of instances of that where like a Jamaican group, but more contemporary in its focus, is backing a vintage artist. And it's good, of course, it's good, but it's not the thing.
Yeah.
And when artists like the Expanders are backing Leonard Dillon, they have gone to school and they are experts in the minutia of nuance of this type of music in a way that I think around the world, I've played with many great bands around the world, but it's hard to find bands that can hold a candle to the Hepcats and the Expanders and this caliber of band that we have here. And so when these Jamaican artists were coming, uniformly, they were so excited.
And they knew what to expect when they arrived in Los Angeles. And you mentioned Leonard Dillon. Ben, I think he's the percussionist, right?
Ben was.
Yeah, and there's a song that I think they use a battle. I'm not sure the percussionist used. And he said no one has ever found out what exactly that was. And Ben found it.
For the whip.
Yeah.
Yes,
said,
right.
Look at that.
There's 2 bottles.
I said
And
no.
He'd really
no
gone to town. He
one
tried some bottles like this one has that note and this one has that note.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Not
I
in,
remember that
not
too.
in Paris. No one else knew what it was.
And
Ben found it.
Ben's probably still playing those bottles now in California, Honey Drops, right?
So
I love that. Yeah, no, I can just imagine though, Chris, and I had the pleasure of being at your place during some of these rehearsals, but I mean, what an experience. Just
and I think of all of them, I mean, Ethiopians and Leonard Dillon have a special place in my heart. I really remember.
He was a special person too.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Profoundly deep. He has depth.
I was, as I said earlier, like I was exposed essentially to the vintage Jamaican music initially through two-tone.
Right.
And then there, at the time, like in the beginning of the 80s, it was only by virtue of those bands, the two-tone bands being successful, that Mango or Trojan would start to reissue. And
interesting.
that first was it the ones with the checkerboard fronts, the Trojan compilations, like 20 reggae classics, I think.
Yes.
And the first one was basically all the tunes covered by two-tone acts or by UB40 on Labor of Love.
Yes.
And so that was the first time I was hearing Melodians, Sweet Sensation. I'd heard UB40.
Sure, same here. Yeah.
And I'd heard the Specials do Monkey Man, but I'd not heard the Maytals do it.
Yeah.
And, so I remember, like we said before, it was hard to get access to all these things. Absolutely. I remember reading some liner notes on something or other about how the skinheads back in England would just, like, the young kids would be outside hoping that they'd hear a little bit of the Upsetters or the Ethiopians. And I didn't really even know these groups at this time, but I just, from this liner note, that was the first thing of the Ethiopians. It stuck in my head. Right. And then later, that original reggae hit sounds of Ethiopians, that was a Trojan compilation, I think. It was the classic reissue collection of Ethiopians that came out first. Wow. And I was so into that. And that was the album that really, like, I remember even the night I had come back from some gig with King Apparatus. We'd driven back from some city an hour or two away, and it was like 3 a.m. and I'm just like chilling out before I go to bed. And I put on the headphones and I'm listening to that thing, and it sounded, I just got it in a way that I never had. Like, it'd been like sound that I was appreciating.
Sure.
Somehow it just like sunk in a different way. And the Ethiopians, I really remember that moment. That was what I was listening to. Mm-hmm. And first of all, even to see him perform, because he, like Prince Buster, wasn't a super active guy. He wasn't a Stranger Kohler or a Derek Morgan who goes around the lot.
They were working in Europe, not in the United States.
Okay.
But they worked
until Warren brought them, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So that was the only time I ever. Oh no, there was the Henry Fonda Theater, and then later he did another show at Tub Club.
Correct. Yes.
So those are the two times I saw
Double bill at the Dub Club with Vernon Maytone.
Right. So moving forward now.
So lucky.
Real quick before we move forward, Chris Murray combo. I first saw the combo when it was you,
Ben,
Ben on drums,
Cheeky,
and Cheeky's, I think.
am I right?
Before Cheeky's Jeff.
Yes, it was Refredo. Sorry,
Mhm.
Refredo first. But talk about the musicians who have been part of the combo over the years.
Sure. So the very first time there was a Chris Murray combo actually was a Canadian group with some musicians from Victoria. I'll be going up to Victoria Ska Festival in June.
Right.
For their 25th anniversary.
Yep.
And so that first Chris Murray combo episode, we did a Canadian tour in 2000, so before Bluebeat Lounge.
Okay.
And it was the only time we did it, but it was as that Chris Murray combo branding. And then when Bluebeat Lounge started, for the first, I want to say 6 months or 5 months, I was just performing solo because that's what I was doing. There had been no combo yet here. And Ben Farrar just started to come out to the shows. It was a scene. People were coming out to hang out.
Yeah.
And I had seen him play with C-Spot, but I remember the first time I saw him play, I think he was sitting in for the Dynamics.
Okay.
And I really noticed, wow, that guy's very talented. And
You got some training from Scatterlight drummer, Nibs.
yes, I mean, he is a talented musical person and has a special charisma and light on stage. And so he just started coming out and he was kind of like, hey, let me play. So he started jamming with me and we would perform as a two-piece. And then John Pantel re-enters the scene. He was doing a show at the Troubadour where he was trying to bring together, as I said before, how the ska scene kind of came into subgroups. He was trying to reintegrate a more Latino, third wave, local scene with the roots rocksteady scene. And so I remember like La Banda Scalavera and a couple other bands from that community were put on a bill at the Troubadour with Tight Spot was on Old Girl Band.
Right. Yep.
And there was another roots band that I don't remember in this moment. And he said to me, this was the first year of Bluebeat Lounge, and I was already doing a duo thing with Ben. Can you find a bass player and play on this bill? So Jeff had been the bass player in C-Spot, I think, up to that point, and also in After Hours, where I had sung with them. So I met him through those things. And so we invited him to play with us on that bill.
Okay.
And he was already also coming out to shows and hanging out. And from that moment, he just was there. So for a year, Jeff was the bass player. Then he got the call to play in Tiger Army.
Right. Yeah.
We're doing really well. And he actually came up as an upright bass player in psychobilly bands, even more than rocksteady style stuff. So when that call came, that was, he moved on to that. And then Cheeky's came in. And Cheeky's and Ben were the group through the rest of the Bluebeat Lounge era. And Bluebeat Lounge continued up until essentially Knitting Factory closed its doors at the end of 2009. I think the farewell show, which was a 3-room event, was the second last public show that they hosted at the location.
Yeah.
And
you transition to the Dub Club.
You would occasionally do some stuff with Tom at the Dub Club, right? For a while.
That was, yes. After Knitting Factory had closed, there was no, well, first of all, Knitting Factory was suggesting that they would open a location downtown. And that never happened. If that had happened, likely I would have tried to transition things there if it was the right size room, all those things. But it didn't happen. So I tried a thing at the Troubadour. I did 1 or 2 shows there, which was fine, but it's a real hassle to get into West Hollywood. It's a different vibe. And again, it wasn't the situation where Knitting Factory cut at the door. There was actual risk on putting on larger shows there.
Right.
And as a musician, it's like, I'm not really a promoter by trade, and I don't want to lose my rent, you know. And but at a certain time, Tom approached me, Tom Chastain at Dub Club, and Dub Club had been an institution for all these years. It had been Bluebeat on Tuesday, Dub Club on Wednesday,
Right,
and a
right.
lot of the same bodies and faces were in both, and it was a nice compatible, how do you say, compatible,
Yeah.
symbiotic community. And so now Dub Club had been upstairs at the Echo Plex is upstairs.
Echo,
Echo is a building, right?
Echo's up, Echoplex down. Yeah.
So for years it was at the smaller room upstairs, which was still at maybe 300 people.
Mhm.
And then it got so popular, it moved to the big room, which is more like 800. It's a bigger room.
Right.
And now at a certain point, he was running 2-room events where he'd bring in various outside promoters to program live music upstairs, and he'd be running DJs and MCs downstairs.
Right.
So I would say that for maybe 3 or 4 years, I would do 2 to 3 shows a year.
Yeah.
Where it was a Dub Club meets Bluebeat Lounge situation.
Cool. Yeah.
And those were really amazing events because the history of it, Dub Club and Bluebeat, were really like tied in people's minds and hearts a lot. And to bring them together in that way was really powerful.
Yeah. Special.
And extremely unique.
Right.
Yes.
Ska Rocksteady upstairs, Ska Rocksteady and early reggae, and downstairs you get the roots.
Yeah.
And the sprinkler dancer.
Right.
And I have to say briefly, like what Tom has done, as well as people like you, and more, to really go above and beyond to bring Jamaican artists to Los Angeles has been amazing. Some acts that are so obscure that
You won't see any words.
one of my favorites was seeing Prince Jazzbo, backed by Expanders at Dub Club. His only ever U.S. performance,
Right. That.
and it was a real event. And I knew him because he was a vocalist on some tracks on Super Rape, which I had as a teenager in high school.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I saw it promoted, and I called up Tom, Prince Jazzbo?
Yeah, the real.
I'd never heard of him performing ever. And he's like, yes. And so for Bluebeat and Dub Club to be aligned in that way was really special.
Indeed. Yeah.
Right. So as I was going to move forward, we've talked a lot about the past and the present. So let's move forward to
I know more about the
Supernova.
past.
You'll be at Supernova. You're looking forward this. I think it's when is it? September.
Yeah.
September. Yeah, it's on the East Coast. Very extremely unique event.
Yes, Supernova. This is the 10th anniversary for Supernova.
Have you performed here before?
Yes, I performed at all of them.
Oh, all of them.
What?
Wow.
Oh.
So I have a special history with Supernova. Just the couple that run Supernova, Tim and April Receiver. I was the first act that they ever booked as promoters, and I was on the East Coast and looking for another show to fill out a weekend. And someone approached them and they said, "We'll do a house party for Chris Murray." And then so that got set up. Then King Django with his band wanted to get on the bill, and they're like, "Well, this is too big for a house party now." So they moved it to like a microbrew, craft brewing place, the Blue and Gray Brewery. And so we had just a little show in the brew house, which was fun. And that was their first ever show that they promoted.
Wow.
And then the next year they ran the Blue and Gray Brew Fest in the parking lot, a one-day event, which had pie tasters on it. There were some ska scene things, but also some other types of acts. There was a bluegrass band that played. It wasn't a ska reggae exclusive thing. The following year, they rebranded it as the Virginia Ska Fest. Now it was ska reggae only. And then they came back and they rebranded as Supernova. And since then, it's been Supernova every year, except when COVID interrupted.
Right.
And you've been at it every year.
Yes.
Right.
So
So that's a big one in the. Oh,
Mhm.
sorry.
And somehow we'll be on the same stage.
Yeah,
this year.
juniors
You have been invited.
MC,
invited.
awesome. It's a great festival. I mean,
I've
in 2
heard nothing
years,
but good
they
things.
did it from a pub show with me and King Django to 3 full days. Plus, they always have like a pre-party the
Yeah.
night before the 3 days. So essentially, like 4 days of festival, and they've gone to a lot of trouble to bring international artists, which is getting harder and harder with visas and expenses and such.
Right.
And it really has become, I think, like the U.S. It's the #1 ska festival, absolutely, and it's a
Mhm.
destination
Right.
event.
No, both of you guys have better memory than I do. Can you mention some of the people who are going to be performing? I'm just giving it a plug. I know for a fact that they're from Los Angeles. We have the Steady 45. They'll be back in Pioneers. Who was your member?
Since it hasn't happened yet, I don't remember. I've seen some posters, but
Okay.
in the past, they've had a lot of great acts. Like, I mean, they had Roddy Radiation from Specials do his act. Last year, they
Angel
had
Cole, I think,
Manners,
performing last year.
Angel Cole, as well as like the cream of the North American scene. Like they had Toasters, always Pie Tasters.
Hepcat's
Had Hepcat. They've had Western Standard Time.
Yeah.
They had Holly Cook last year.
Yeah. Yeah. This year I know they have Johnny Osborne.
Yes.
They have Slackers. Yeah, I can't remember others off the top of my head, but no, it's
But that's good.
it's
That's what it's
absolutely a big one. You also mentioned, so you're playing Victoria ska and reggae.
So we may as well give them a plug as well.
Yes, that's
Other
also,
states, right?
that's also really a really nice one. Where else? Well, what other big summertime festivals are you playing?
So I'm going to be in the UK in July, August, and the anchor date for that is the Rebellion Festival.
Oh, nice. That's a great one.
Technically, it's a punk festival, but especially in the UK, punk and ska are really aligned in people's consciousness because
you're punk at heart, Chris.
Yes, like at heart, I grew up at a time where I was receiving Two Tone and the Clash and the Sex Pistols all in one. This is what's happening.
But you've been extremely loyal to Ska and Rocksteady.
Yes, I still love some Clash once in a while.
Yeah.
But when you perform, you stick with the Ska.
Well,
Rocksteady.
Largely, however,
and
I'm gonna give this plug.
Okay.
You do once, if not twice a week, a Facebook live stream, Chris, where you delight fans virtually. And you always have themes, right? You usually do.
Very often.
And I've seen, and the reason I mentioned this right now specifically is because you have done one on Joe Strummer and the Clash. You know, you do talk about some of the other themes that you do.
So yes, just to give a brief intro to the whole thing, Bluebeat live stream is a live stream I started in April 2020. So
during COVID,
as COVID began, artists started to stream, and I was the first artist interviewed on Supernova. Had a Supernova Saturday session where they were doing that type of thing. So they started with me, and then
what better person?
At that point, people were starting to stream, and everyone's like, "When are you going to stream?" And I was like, still an old dog, like, I've never done that. Which button do I push? But I knew, okay, I'm going to be on Supernova, and everyone's doing it. I need to do it. So I need to have a date to promote when I'm on the Supernova one. So Devin Morrison from Expanders was doing Tuesday already, which I would have picked because that was the traditional Bluebeat night. But that was gone. And other nights were gone. Slackers were doing Saturday, and Kristen Forbes, Lady Hatchet, was doing Sunday. So I started doing that, and we just had this Tuesday was the 4th anniversary.
Wow.
So it's been 4 complete years of. There have been a couple of times when I've been on the road where it wasn't possible to do, but otherwise, those years it's been a weekly event plus one additional monthly, which will be on a Sunday at noon, because starting at 5 p.m. Pacific time makes it hard for people in Europe. It's really
True.
quite late there already. And so when you're touring, going city to city, most bands are playing the same material, more or less, every night to different people in different places. With this, people were coming from all over to the virtual space. And, you know, at the start, we thought, oh, well, COVID will be done in 5 weeks, 6 weeks. And it just wasn't the case.
No.
So pretty soon, I realized, in the same way I realized I wanted to bring other artists into Bluebeat Lounge to bring energy, that creating a theme and really putting the work in to have the material different week to week was important, because I couldn't play the same 20 songs to the same people week after week. And so through time, easy types of themes are like an artist, like The Clash or The Special, or just two-tone, where, oh, okay, I already know some songs, like Bob Marley. I've played 6 or 7 already, but to make it a spotlight, I need to learn another 5 or 6. So in the time, especially when it was the only thing going on, we were all just at home. I would have a full week to prepare for the following theme, and really some time to get into learning material. And so at one point I realized I'd done a lot of songs, and I actually tallied them up. And so currently I've done 471 different songs over those 4 years. Like, that's,
and you've remembered all of them.
And so that has stretched me all over the place. Definitely there's some punk music that's come in.
Sure. Some Minto.
Yes, that was like something that I really found a lot of time to get into this time. So for anyone who's not familiar with Mento, it's the style of music that was more indigenous to Jamaica before ska. And ska was really American R&B mixed with Mento and Calypso and various elements coming together as a pop music, where Mento was more homegrown. And so it's a music that I really come to love. And I'm so thankful now that things like YouTube and Spotify exist, where if you wanted to find a Mento collection to buy 30 years ago, I don't know if it existed.
Right.
Now there's a lot of material out there.
Yeah. No, some good. Indeed.
And I did one. I really learned to play guitar at summer camp. I was a city kid, and my mom sent me out of the city so I would be in touch with nature, which I'm really thankful for. And there was always some camp counselor with an acoustic guitar around the campfire, and we're singing Four Strong Winds and Puff the Magic Dragon and King of the Road and stuff like that, you know, and songs with actions. And
Sure.
So speaking of songs, approximately how many songs do you have to your credit, and how important
recordings?
Yeah, writing
I've
on original material.
never added them up, honestly. So I don't have a quick answer, but as far as releases, there were 2 King Apparatus albums. The first one had 17 songs, and I wrote them all.
Okay.
Second one had 16 songs, I think, and there were 3 or 4 that other members had contributed, so a good dozen on that one. Then I've had solo releases, 4-track Adventures, 4-track Aganza, Raw, with the combo, Why So Rude, and also Buckle Up.
Yep.
Plus Yard Sale, plus Caps Lock, which is a writing project.
Yes, right.
And so with those releases alone, that's got to be roughly 100 songs that were recorded and released. And there's got to be, well, as well as co-writes that either other artists did, like we were talking about Greg before. So when I arrived in LA in early 1997, my first album, 4-track Adventures, came out on Moon in 96. And Greg called up my voicemail and left a message. And it was kind of, I thought of it more recently, like, you know, the beginning of Right on Time. where it's Greg's dad calling him up like,
Right.
yeah, listen to Scientific, it's right on time.
Yes.
Greg basically, without the backtrack, was leaving me a message like, I heard your album and I really love it and I really dig it. And next time you come to LA, we got to write some rocksteady.
Wow.
So I got this voicemail from Greg Lee.
Wow.
And then the next time I showed up was, within the year, I was back in LA and I slept on his floor for a couple of weeks. And he was already working on I Can't Wait.
Yeah.
I was already working on We Do the Ska. And we spent some time like showing each other the songs and making suggestions and contributions. And then he went on with the horn players and the rest of Hepcat to finish I Can't Wait. I did some additional lyric writing to We Do the Ska. But those two songs really passed through the same filter, same time.
Yeah. It's something that you'll
Wonderful.
forever cherish.
There are many, many times I've just been somewhere and written a song with somebody in an afternoon, and that band covered it, or it's still, well, not so many are just fully unheard because Bluebeat live stream over the time, there has really evolved a core crew that come out, and they're there every week.
Right.
And if some of them have, at the end of this month, it's going to meet 250 streams.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
So there are people.
What has the response been like?
I mean, I would say now it's a hardcore, consistent following, which is definitely much smaller than it was 4 years ago when everybody
was home.
all of a sudden home.
Right.
But there's a crew that is there every week, and then there's like a next level of people like, oh, I haven't seen you for a few weeks. How are you doing? And these people now, it's a community, and they're having conversations in the chat, and they're requesting songs. But there are people there who probably seen 150 or 200 of the streams.
Yeah.
So they know, like, he knows this song. We're going to request this song. Remember that one you played when you were in summer camp?
Right.
We want to hear that today.
There we go. Yeah.
And so all these different songs that come from different parts of my life, or co-writes, or even songs that I've just written that aren't reggae or ska, that so in the course of playing live, in the context of being perceived as a reggae ska artist, because that is what I do a lot, primarily, that's what people expect.
Sure.
And when I'm playing with other ska reggae artists at those shows, if I were to start doing some campfire song, people would be like, this is not our thing.
So Chris, as we're nearing the end here, you recently performed with a really solid group of musicians here in the Elysians, and there's an upcoming show this coming Saturday. The what would the date of that be? Just so we get that would be the 6th here in Orange County as part of the Steady 45's album release show. Talk about the Elysians, if you would.
Yes, so I have done one performance with the Elysians a couple weeks ago in Long Beach with Vernon Maytone and Norma Frazier, backed by Kingston Agogo.
You might have heard of Ska Mania, Junior.
Sometimes I hear the name.
You were there, right?
I think
that was an amazing.
But for people who don't know, yeah, I was there.
So I had played a couple of gigs with the Elysians just on the same bill in the past. And they had a singer, Jerry, who left the group, but they had already committed to do the show with Vernon Maytone. And so they called me up and they're like, hey, would you help us out? We have this show, but we need a singer. So I said, sure. And went to a few rehearsals and learned some songs. And that was really a lot of fun. And so this
Mandy B also, right, sings.
We should say who Mandy is.
Right.
Yes. So
Introduction.
Mandy and Greg were partners, and she had been singing with the Elysians with Jerry, the two of them, when Jerry left. Right. So in the format, I have a few songs that I sing on my own. She has a few songs she sings on her own. We have a few that are duets.
Yeah.
And they have some instrumentals. And
And that performance was what part of the highlight of the night.
Yes, that was a really, really beautiful
Mhm.
performance.
And
Yes.
and in the words of the Elysians, one of their best performances.
I thought it was great. I thought the
Oh.
whole night was great, and I thought Elysians
Beyond
came.
great, beyond great. Especially the duets with you and man.
Yes, yes.
And so we're playing this week with Steady 45's release party
Huge.
and
Mhm. La
Jackie
Santa
Mendez,
in for people who don't know.
Right,
La
La Santa
Santa
and Santana, right.
Jackie Mendez and the Scufflers,
And it's extensive.
Steady Beat.
Israelite.
Extensive. Mhm.
What is it, Steady Beat All Stars? What is it? Or
No, the Kingston Beat All Stars,
Kingston Beat.
Israelites. Yeah, it's fat.
And then there's a Jamaican artist that just got added.
Yes, Rudy Mills.
No.
Somebody
Not Rudy Mills. Keelan Beckford. I
Yes,
better remember.
Keelan
Keelan Beckford.
Right.
No
check
respect.
out some of his stuff today on YouTube because I wasn't familiar with his music. And there's
You
some.
have plenty of distinguished companies. Steady 45 said they hadn't even heard of him before.
I hadn't heard of him, but there's some nice stuff.
Yeah.
Oh yes, man.
Very
Yes, man.
much so.
I think his biggest hit to my recollection is combination.
Okay.
I heard that one. It's a great track.
It is a
Yes.
great track.
I think that one may have
Yeah.
ridden the charts in Jamaica.
Right. So do you and will you be doing more with Elysians after this, or is it TBD?
I'm enjoying it. So I think probably I'm going to bring the attitude that when I'm around, if I can do stuff, I will be happy to have the
Right.
experience and do it.
Yeah.
More and more post-COVID life is back, and I'm on the road and away more.
Yeah.
Other things are happening, and there actually will be the first Chris Murray combo show this month for Clemente, who does the Eric Kohler shows.
Yes.
He's got an event called Ska Land where Inspector from Monterey are the headliners, and at Catch One in
Yeah.
in LA, which is again like a 3-room, 20+ band all
Nice.
day ska
Right.
craziness. So he said, "Hey, can you put together a combo and play on this?"
Who rounds out the combo?
This time it will be Fritz and Mickey, who are the original rhythm section for Steady 45s.
Right. Okay. Solid.
He plays the upright bass.
Yes.
You know?
Nice. That's solid. Yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful.
So
Wow.
a couple of fun shows coming up in town this month.
Indeed. Chris, I know that we've only scratched the surface, but anything that you feel is a must to share here before we wrap this up?
I think overall, I really want to just express to the world, like I'm really thankful for this life that I have, where the stories that I've told, like I've lived these things. I'll finish off with a story. The first time I heard the word ska, the first time I ever knew ska existed, I heard Madness One Step Beyond at my high school dance, and it must have been brand new. And I remember it because the "Hey you, don't watch that," the vocal spoken introduction. I'm like, what is this? What? There's no music. It's just talking. It was just like, that's so random. And then the track kicked in. I'm like, whoa. From that moment on, I was a fan of two-tone. And it was a while before I understood, that's a Prince Buster song from the 60s. And Roland Alfonso was the credited artist. Wow. And then, later in life, I got to know Roland Alfonso. And to have a life where something I've loved so much has become what I do, and made me part of a community that this and loves this thing the way I do. It's a real gift. It's a beautiful life.
So 2 quick points. One, Madness is coming to town on May 26th.
Yes.
Here in Los Angeles, the youth in Englewood.
Right.
Yeah. The other point, where's a question essentially? I feel remiss not to ask you if you have any new recordings coming out, or you just.
I don't have anything scheduled at this point. I'm talking to Chuck Wren at Jump Up about doing something, a next release, and I haven't honestly felt very motivated to record during the COVID times, but recently I definitely have been dusting off the studio and making a little sound. So,
right. No,
and what do you have in mind?
let's see how things go.
Of course, I know you wouldn't tell us. Fantastic.
Yeah.
It's been awesome talking to you.
Yeah, Chris,
Man,
thank you.
wow.
And also, we appreciate all your
Contribution
kindness
in
and
every sense of
and
the word.
collaboration over the years too. You're always just so wonderful.
Right back at you. You guys bring so much to the scene. And as I said, I'm a big fan of the one-on-one format. And I think that you guys did just do this before COVID.
No.
No, this came
As a
about
result of
during COVID because we wanted to continue the panel discussions at the museum, which we did a couple pre-COVID, and then a couple post, and we are going to work on our what will now be the 5th one at some point this fall. But no, it came out during COVID. Yeah,
I feel like one-on-one and Bluebeat live stream, we are like the last stream standing.
Guidance for 4 years, right?
yes,
Right.
indeed. We have to preserve and promote. But
Mhm.
no, we appreciate you taking the time to
My
talk.
pleasure.
And we'll definitely see you out there, out and about, at a
On
show.
Saturday?
Well,
Saturday or Sunday?
this weekend.
Yes,
Indeed.
right. Come to think of it, yet what's
Great.
on the event? This will be out before
This will come out this weekend. Yes.
this weekend.
But definitely get out there and see Chris, whether it's solo or with the Legions or with the combo. And again, I do want to dedicate this episode and this conversation also to Greg Lee, and again just send our love and condolences to everyone who's been affected by his passing, and we're all very fortunate to have experienced Greg and have
Yes.
And Chris, you've been a magnificent institution in this city.
Indeed.
We say sorry to the people of Toronto who will have to leave. That's all I can say, But we
I
have,
still show up there.
we say thanks.
Yes.
And thanks to everyone for the ongoing support. Please subscribe to this podcast series and our YouTube channel. Follow us at History of LA on Instagram and join our Facebook page. Of course, this series is produced by Rockery Radio.
Yes.
My good friend here, Eric Kohler.
And please do your part
man.
to help celebrate, preserve, and promote the scene. And I will say, get out and come out and put on your dancing shoes and enjoy yourself. We'll leave you with those words. Much love and be well. Chris, take care. Thank you so much, Junior. Thank you as always. And we truly do appreciate everyone's ongoing support out there. And until next time, take care, everyone.
Yes.
Bye-bye now.